Hi, this is Bishop Craig in Northern Michigan, and this is take one for the week of September 3. Peace be with you. I hope that you enjoyed a wonderful Labor Day and the unofficial end of summer. That makes me sad. My week is picking up, and it will be a busy run till Christmas and New Year's, I think. So on Tuesday, we have executive committee meeting. On Wednesday, Synod staff and some Zoom appointments. On Thursday, Zoom conference of bishops, and I'm doing some Zoom teaching Thursday night. On Saturday is Synod council, and on Sunday I get to go to St. Peter's in Unionville to celebrate their 150th anniversary. The worship service is at 2, and if you feel like a trip to the Thumb, I'm sure you'd be welcome to join us. So that is my week. I'm continuing to enjoy this quick trip through the Old Testament that we are getting from the lectionary. The reading this Sunday, the Old Testament reading, is the Passover. So we have gone from the burning bush to the place where there's been a bunch of plagues, and now God is instructing Moses and Aaron to have the Passover meal. The Israelites are to put blood on their doorposts because the angel of death is coming and will bring death to every firstborn in Egypt, both humankind and animal. And so the message here is that ours is a God who brings life out of death. And in this reading, ours is a God who brings death in order to bring life. Ours is a God who brings death in order to bring life. That sometimes is a hard pill to swallow because we're talking real death. You know, the blood of the lambs on the doors make it unmistakable to everybody that some dying is going to be going on. So that would be an interesting conversation and an interesting sermon. It is that God brings life out of death, and sometimes God brings death in order to bring life. And what does that mean for us today? And so we get kind of the Maundy Thursday reading, if you will, in September. The second reading from Romans has a bit of an Advent theme, where Paul tells us, it's time to wake from sleep because salvation is closer now than it was when we first believed. And so we hear that in Advent. But what does it mean for us to wake from sleep as a church in this moment? And as we celebrate the unofficial end of summer and return to fall. And what does it mean that salvation is closer to us now? That would be an interesting sermon. It would also be interesting, Paul talks a lot about, in this Romans reading, about loving one another. And loving one another fulfills all the law. And so the question changes from what is the right thing to do to what is the loving thing to do. And of course, the reality is even when two people or a community decide what is the loving thing, not everybody is going to agree. They're going to disagree. And so I'm thinking about a family. I mean, not only a congregation, a Christian community, a church family, but a real family when it comes time to take extraordinary life-saving measures for a loved one. And everyone is trying to do the loving thing. And some members of the family say we need to do extraordinary measures, and others say the loving thing is to stop. So what does it mean for congregations or church families? Do you take extraordinary measures or do you stop? So what is the loving thing to do? And of course, even when people are trying to do the loving thing, there's going to be conflict. And there's certainly going to be conflict when people are not doing the loving thing, but when they're doing the self-centered thing or the self-interest thing or the thing that allows them to hang on to power or the thing that helps them to be righteous or the thing that helps them to be right. And so in our gospel reading from Matthew 18, Jesus tells us how conflict is to be handled in the Christian community. And here we realize that we as Christians and as Christian communities handle conflict different than the world does. And the difference is we talk to people in whom we are in conflict. We don't talk about people to whom we are in conflict. We go directly to the one to whom we've got conflict. We don't go to others about the person with whom we have conflict. And so Jesus says, first go to the person individually. If you don't get satisfaction, if you will, or if it can't be resolved, then you take a couple of witnesses, and then you take it to the council, and then you take it to the church. And it's always about being reconciled, not about being right. So what I have learned is that when you go to someone to say you have done something unloving or you have sinned against me, you need to be ready for that person to say, well, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. It's not that you were all right and I was all wrong, but here's my perspective. And if you're not ready and able and willing to own that maybe you didn't do something perfect, it's going to be really hard to reconcile. And so what you end up doing is putting a nail in the coffin of the relationship. So I'm remembering something else Jesus said in Matthew's gospel. You blind guides, Jesus says. I don't like that phrase, but he's right. And he tells us to take why are you worrying about taking the twig out of your neighbor's eye? First take the log out of your own eye. So part of the process of dealing with conflict is we need to examine our own stuff, right? And own that. And if we go to another and can begin with, here's how I may have done you wrong, and here's how I'm feeling you did me wrong, there's a chance for reconciliation. And if it doesn't work, then you take a couple people with you for witnesses, and then you go to the council, and then you go to the church. And if it doesn't work, then the relationship ends. You let that person be to you as a tax collector. But of course, Jesus spent time with tax collectors and brought them back into the kingdom of God. And so what we're talking about here is not like writing people off, but taking a time apart. And so sometimes, it's in the old days, they used to, when something happened, somebody did something terrible, the pastor or the bishop would say to the person, well, as your penance, you need to go on a pilgrimage, knowing that the pilgrimage would take the person out of the village for a long time. And maybe people could then be in a different place when the person came back. So maybe there needs to be a time apart. What we do know is that when we deal with a conflict, the first thing is not to go on Facebook. The first thing is not to have a gathering of your friends and talk bad about the person. The first thing is not to call the bishop's office, because the bishop's office is going to ask you, have you talked to that person yet? Well, no. Okay, that's where you start. And we will remind you, especially I will remind you, of Matthew 18. So these readings, I think, all fit together. God brings life out of death, and sometimes God brings death in order to bring life. We participate in God's bringing of life by being loving and being aware that salvation is close at hand. And when a death of a relationship comes, we deal with the brokenness, the death, directly and in ways that seek reconciliation. I won't be preaching that in Unionville this week, because we'll be using some readings aimed at celebrating their 150 years, and I'm excited about the sermon I get to preach there. So that's take one for the week of the 3rd. I'm Bishop Craig up north. I hope you have a great transition back to fall, and the peace of Christ be with you always. Take care.